Welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, a place for parents and caregivers to find encouragement, insight, and strategies as we build a strong foundation of attachment and trust. I'm your host, JD Wilson, and today I'm joined by dear friends of mine, Mo and Tona Ottinger. And Mo and Tona give leadership to Empowered to Connect as an organization, or ETC as we call it. And so maybe that's the best place for us to start. Before we get into kind of who you guys are individually, why don't you guys kind of give us how you got connected to Empowered to Connect to begin with?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, JD. We really found Empowered to Connect. We started our parenting journey over, oh my goodness, our oldest is 20. So it's been a long road of parenting. And we started our parenting journey in a very traditional way. And when I say traditional, I mean that we had read all the parenting books that were popular at the time. We had done due diligence to talk to our parents and families and friends and faith community about what does it mean to be a good parent. And we felt like we just came into parenting blazing. Like we thought we were awesome and that we were going to like kill this parenting thing and that we were just going to do a fantastic parenting job. And I laugh now because, oh, goodness gracious. Like, oh, wow. Okay.
Then we started parenting.
We actually started to parent, and something completely different happened. But we started parent like super traditionally. So when I think about that, I think like there was this idea for us that parenting was a job. And we were going to do a fantastic job. I mean, you see little kids running around and they, yes, mommy and daddy, yes, mother and father. And they just obey with like this first time obedience, so sweet and tenderly and kindly. And you think those must be awesome parents.
Right.
So completely came into parenting, idealistic, full of energy and hope and desire, and none of that is bad. But we quickly, I would say within the first couple of years, realized that those traditional parenting strategies and philosophies were not working in the life of our family. There was, I think Mo would agree, a good bit of discouragement and discontentment and shall I say hopelessness at that particular point?
Absolutely.
Several years into parenting.
Yeah, I think when we looked, everything you described about the children was about their behavior. And so that's how we defined our parenting, was all about how our kids behaved.
Right.
And everything we did was around behavior modification. And it is okay to want respectful, obedient children. We're not saying that's not what we want.
Right.
It's just kind of the how and why we get there. And so for us in this traditional model, so much of it was around behavior modification. It was punitive. It was isolation. It was giving the stink eye. It was taking away privileges. It was threatening. It was a lot of raising our voices. It was just so much.
Yeah, basically we wanted some parenting strategies where we could parent in a way that wouldn't exhaust us.
Right.
We didn't want to be exhausted parents, and our children wouldn't embarrass us. That was really, we just weren't being super intentional. So I think it was very much about like we want easy to hang out with kids that are, pretty compliant. That's a good word. Like we wanted compliant kids that didn't make us too tired, that wouldn't embarrass us in front of friends and family.
Well, and a lot of that's hindsight, right? You can see now,
Oh,
like those were your motivations.
Totally.
Yeah. We were not nearly as insightful. We were deep in the water, deep in the weeds of parenting.
Because I think a lot of people are coming to this, maybe to this podcast in that same place that you guys are in now, thinking, I thought this is how I'm supposed to be doing this, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we're both good with people.
Right.
And so we thought, if we're good with a 35-year-old, surely we can be good with a 2-year-old.
Yeah, we got this.
We got this.
Right.
Totally have this.
Yeah.
We didn't have it, JD. And it took us a couple years to get there, I would say. And it really was whenever we started using some strategies and, we had some kiddos that would struggle. And I think really all kids do. At the time, it didn't really feel like that, but we were misunderstanding meltdowns, and we were misunderstanding, why they weren't just quick and easy to comply with whatever it was that we asked them to do. And we were out of step with our kids because our kids were, now we understand, trying to communicate with us in the way that they could. And all it felt like to us was disrespect, disobedience, a lack of compliance. And so we got to a place in our marriage and in our family where we were really, really discouraged. And our kids were really struggling.
Right, because the way we were parenting was, not only was it not working, it was driving their behaviors. It was amplifying. So not only was it not curbing it, it was making it worse.
Right.
Right. So if you have a kiddo that, maybe struggles with feeling overwhelmed, and then you have a parent who comes to that meltdown or that moment when they are overwhelmed, and you come at them with some punitive, a lot of words, a lot of instruction, a lot of, do this or this, a lot of consequences, then all you're doing is driving them further into meltdown. And so we did not know any of that. All we knew is that what is happening at the Ottinger family house is not what we bargained for.
Yeah.
And we need help. And so our only strategy at that point was to just stop listening to other voices. I mean, that's really what we did. We set the books aside and didn't pick them up anymore. And I would say, got pretty isolated.
Yeah, it needed to be done, but it was lonely. It was especially, I was on staff at a church, and so we really had to pull away in some regard and figure this thing out ourselves.
Well, and pastor kids' expectations is a whole different ballgame even than just having, neighbors watching, right?
Well, yes, it
A
is.
whole lot more pressure.
Just a little bit of pressure.
Right.
Just a little bit of pressure, yeah. So I think it was about that time. Our older two kiddos were maybe, 5 and 4, somewhere in that age range. And a dear friend of mine called and said, Tana, I have a book that you need to read. And she, at the time, was going through classes to become a certified foster parent and had to, some required reading. And she was like, you need to read this book. And I was like, yeah, I don't really do that anymore. I don't read those books anymore. I don't read parenting books because they are not prescriptive to my family, and all they did was make me feel discouraged and a failure. And if I can't even do what the experts say, and my kid, it was more isolating and more defeating to hear advice that just fell flat.
Yeah.
And over and over and over again. But when you do something your best friend says, and they know your heart and they know your reality and they encourage you, I picked the book up and read it. And all I can say is I wept through the entire thing. And it was the book The Connected Child, written by Dr. Karen Purvis and David Cross at Texas Christian University. And I felt like, here is a book that speaks to the heart of what I think my kids need. And I remember telling Mo, I think there's something important about this book because I feel when I read it that there's kindness in the pages of this book, that there's compassion and understanding, and no slight on what we had been doing, but everything we'd been doing up to that point was pretty punitive. And it didn't help us. I didn't feel like it was making us kind parents.
Right.
And we were longing for something that helped us connect to our kids. Didn't have that word at the time, but something that felt in our spirit and soul different than what we had been doing. And this book began to sort of lay out a roadmap for us on how to move ahead in a way that was connected and kind.
Absolutely. And we devoured it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we both cried.
All the way through.
All the way through.
Yeah.
And then we heard they were doing a conference. And so we drove 3 hours to the first conference, and I think there was 50 of us in a room, and I think we sat there for 2 days and cried as well. And which those that know me know that's not really a big deal. But this was a different set of tears.
Maybe that was the beginning of your crying phase.
Maybe it was. And it was at that conference that we met Michael and Amy Monroe, And they were starting kind of this beta group with 4 other couples. And I said, man, make it 5. We're coming to Texas. And so we went and got trained over 3 days and Empowered to Connect. And I remember us driving back from Texas just thinking, man, this is so good. And we need it as parents, desperately. And there's a lot of people that need this.
Now, who did the training at the conference y'all went to?
Dr. Purvis.
Okay.
And the Monroes.
Yeah. And at that time, Michael and Amy Monroe were working with Dr. Purvis to write a parenting course, which is what we were basically like begging and pleading to be a part of. And so they were taking the Connected Child book and working together to put it in strategies that would apply to a family in a home. And just, I think really at that time, kind of kicking the tire on how to get, the philosophy is called trust-based relational intervention, and how to get that, is TBRI for short, how to get TBRI into the hands of a family. And so that's what we ran out there to get trained in.
Because at the time, Dr. Purvis was, if I'm understanding right, she was mostly doing this from an academic sense or in a clinical sense. Is that right?
Yeah, she had run a couple of camps for adopted and foster kiddos and had done some research and found significant results in attachment and connection, and some behavior that had begun to change. And then out of that work and that research at TCU, wrote the book. And so she had been working with parents in homes, but the conference that Mo talked about in Nashville, that was the first conference that Empowered to Connect did. It was a collaboration between Show Hope and TCU and Dr. Purvis, Michael and Amy Monroe, and they put that conference on. Awesome. And that really was kind of the origin, if you will, of Empowered to Connect, that beginning conference and then the beginnings of writing that parenting curriculum. So we went and dove knee deep, and I just remember sitting there going, this is it. This is what I have been longing for. This is the permission, if you will, that I have been dying to have to parent our children in a way that moves them towards behavior that is good behavior that we want for them, but it comes at it from a completely different perspective. And so when we think about, why Empowered to Connect parenting, why do we use these strategies and philosophies? Really, for us, it was about some fundamental shifts in perspective. Right. And I don't think those all happened right away. I think it was a slow shifting of thinking and seeing and being. And
right, like it wasn't we read a book and then went to a conference and we drove home and it was like,
off to the races.
Oh, now we're those perfect parents. No.
We got it.
No.
I think there's probably, if I'm honest, an expectation that was going to happen. That, hey, give us a little bit on this and we got it and all is well. No, we're 20 years in and we're in process. We are working this thing out.
Yeah, we're working it out.
So talk some more about the shifts that you were talking about, that going from traditional parenting to ETC. What were those shifts for you guys?
I mean, I think really one of the first ones was that parenting isn't a job to complete. It's a relationship to foster. And so thinking about what does it mean to look at our children in the context of connection and a strong connected relationship, or as some people and professionals talk about it, as attachment. And when you think about the word attachment, really it can be kind of boiled down to the quality of relationship. So what does it mean for me and for Mo to look at our kids and think, how do we parent in a way that builds strong connection, strong attachment, where they feel safe with us, where we feel connected to them, where there's a shared sense of delight and joy and trust. So really at the foundation of everything that we talk about and do is how do we parent in a way that builds connection through trust. And up to that point, that was a major, major shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't think that I would say much of any of the parenting that we were doing was building trust.
No.
In fact, it was fracturing it.
Right.
And it was, if we think back, I mean, we had a good bit of grieving to do And we could talk about that in a future episode. But, what does it mean to sort of think back about, shoulda, coulda, wouldas? But we definitely had to do a good bit of work and are still doing a good bit of work with what does it mean to parent in a way where your strategies weren't creating healing, loving, safe space, but maybe something opposite of that. Yeah. So it was a major shift.
Yeah, and I think too, just within that shift was also that it wasn't just about the child, but it was about us as well. That we had to look at ourselves, and that was new, right? Like when you're in a behavior modification parenting mode, it is all about that child's behavior.
Right.
And the reality is, I had to look at mine, and I had to look at me holistically of just my history, my wiring, my upbringing, my skills, my temperament. I had to, what buttons get pushed. Why am I not attuned to what's happening in this situation? Like, as parents, we had to learn how to be fully present.
Yeah.
And that's more than just turning off the TV or getting off the phone. But it was like, man, if I'm going to connect, if there is going to be trust built, then I've got to be fully present with the child that is in front of me. And especially with little ones, they live in the present. And so if we're always stuck in the past, or, so much of parenting, I think, is, that child does something as a 3-year-old and you're like, oh, we gotta nip this in the butt, because when they get to be 18 or when they're 35, and I think oftentimes we're parenting that 3-year-old as they're a 35-year-old. And let's just enjoy the 3-year-old in front of us. Like Tony just said, look, can we delight in them and be fully present with them? And so that also just meant looking at ourselves.
Absolutely. And thinking about, like, one of the things that Mo just said about being fully present and parenting in the moment, another shift that really meant for us was that we needed to think about what was happening in the moment as an expression of a need, or even maybe an underdeveloped skill or a capacity that our kiddo may not have yet. So a shift for us was that there are needs behind behavior. That behavior is an expression of a need in a way that's adaptive, even sometimes, or a lagging skill, or an inability to express frustration with good feeling words. So it can be anger or frustration or shame or fear coming out in a way that to us just looks like an incredibly disrespectful behavior. It could be a kid who's got, overwhelmed with sensory stimulation and they are in a place of meltdown, but that looks like, defiance. Like, you can't make me do that. I'm not going to do that. Well, if all you're looking at the behavior is you think that's a really disrespectful kid. Right. But it's possible that's a kid saying through their behavior, that scares me. I don't think I can do that. I'm overwhelmed by that. Please don't make me do that. They can't say all that in the moment. All they say is, I'm not going to do that. You can't make me, or whatever might come out,
Right.
So for us, major shift in thinking behavior is an expression of a need. And if we can flip that switch, then we get to be curious parents. We get to be parents who are thinking, what does my kid need from me right now?
Well, and here's for me where ETC was a game changer, was all of the neuroscience that explains that.
Exactly.
And so, and I know we'll unpack all that in future episodes, but part of Dr. Purvis's research was on the brain, and so if you will, why don't you, I guess, let me not get ahead of myself, why don't you keep on going?
No, that's good.
In your story, but as it pertained to the brain science and neuroscience, will you talk a little bit about what you were learning from that perspective?
Yeah. No, that's good. I love it. I mean, that's definitely it. You've got to think about what's happening. I mean, that is a maladaptive, or really now we kind of say it's an adaptive strategy that they don't need anymore. But when you think about stress responses, and so you often hear about fight, flight, and freeze, but there's also another one called Fawn that you may see in children and adults who've experienced trauma or a high ACEs, where it's the brain's just we respond to stress in a certain number of ways. And so this was a major, major game changer for us when we're like, we are not just parenting their heart. Now, we are parenting their heart, but we are parenting brains. And we are parenting brains who have a stress response. And that stress response is a need expressed in them that we can either meet with, like what we had been doing, very structured, punitive, heavy-handed, high structure parenting, or we can come at that, still keeping structure, also future episode. What does it mean to have a balance of nurture and structure? We can talk about that in the future. But really for us at that moment, it was like, let's take into consideration that there is something going on in the brain, the neurochemistry, the architecture, the way that our brain was designed. So if a kiddo is in a place of stress, they are just doing what their brain is designed to do. They're not being difficult. They're not being bad. They are responding in a way that their anatomy was built to respond, which is to get stuck in, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Right, which means they can't access that part of the brain that's going to allow them to make great decisions and respond and do all those things that we were wanting. And so I think that was, yes. I think every few minutes we can say game changer. Like it really was. But I think I just remember thinking, if they are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and literally the amygdala is firing and does not allow them to respond the way that it's my heavy-handedness is. It's man, I'm tearing up right now. It's just, you're asking them to do something they can't do, and so it's just, it's abuse. It's not.
It's just simply unkind.
Yes.
To say to a sweet love that is stuck in a place of stress that they need to comply because you want them to comply. Going back to my motivation, what did I say? I had two motivations I wasn't aware of. One, don't exhaust me. Two, don't embarrass me.
Yeah.
And if you've got a kiddo that gets stuck in their stress response, that amygdala's firing, they can't make logical decisions, their brain's not even fully developed, and we're expecting them to respond like a 30-something that can think through cause and effect. We are setting our babies up to fail. Yeah. And I say babies, I also mean our teenagers and our young adults, and myself even. Like we, back to what Mo was saying, we have to think about ourselves too, and how often we get stuck in fight, flight, and freeze. And we flip our lid as we talk about when we think about the brain and our inability to think thoughtfully and to regulate ourselves. So all of this, which we will unpack in future episodes, that is just, it was a big shift for us. Major, major shift.
Well, and I for Elizabeth and I, one of our biggest game changers was in grieving that, like when we realized all the neuroscience, and we realized what was actually going on, and needs are being communicated through behavior and by behavior. I think then after we grieved that we had been causing more harm than good, you still come back to, but we know that this behavior is not desired, and so you have to still figure out a way to help them to work through what they're working through and do so in a healthy way so that they can be at peace. Because I think that's the other thing is early on I realized how much I was focusing on my own self and like, this isn't working and you're not complying with me because of what the stress it was causing me. And then you realize the stress that the behavior is causing them and the stress that they're living under. And so you come back to square one, which is, okay, so now we need to teach behavior coping strategies that actually help to bring wholeness and peace, right?
Exactly, which I think is one of the reasons why we love Empowered to Connect so very much, is not only does it lay the foundation for the why, but it actually does give us as parents and caregivers and those that are supporting children actual tools and strategies on how to meet those needs, how to connect with them, how to, sometimes attachment-rich or connection-focused parenting gets a little bit of a bad rap as being, what's the word I'm looking for?
Permissive.
Like permissive, yeah. Like it just, it's permissive parenting. That is not what we are talking about.
Right.
We are talking about parenting that keeps a balance of nurture and structure, that does so with compassion and understanding.
Yeah.
And so if I can understand with a posture of curiosity, like I wonder why this particular situation is impacting our kid in this way. And then we can shift our actions in terms of how we respond. And so one of those major shifts for us was don't react, respond. And through the tools that are laid out in ETC, those really did help give us a bit of a roadmap on actually what to do in the moment with a kiddo that needs support. So how do we come to that particular behavior with a posture of connection? One of the little phrases we use is connecting while correcting. So yes, the behavior needs to be addressed. Yes, it needs to be corrected. But we don't, instead of those 4 or 5 tools that Mark talked about at the top of the podcast that we have in our tool belt, verbal reprimand, physical corporal punishment, consequences, any isolation, timeouts, those are all we had in our disposal to do when something happened that we didn't want them to do. Now we have a multitude of other parenting strategies to help them grow. We want our children to become strong, capable, resilient, emotionally well, healthy adults. And we fundamentally believe that happens through healthy, strong, safe, connected adult relationships that are present and supportive and coach them instead of consequence them.
Yep. And we're not looking for perfect parents.
Right.
With that, I don't want anybody to feel like, okay, so we got this, and now come and watch the show. No, we are far from that. But the beauty is it brings you into a relationship with your children. There is a connection to your children. There is a strong attachment. There has been a trust that has been established as a foundation, and that we get to go on this journey together. That we're locking arms. That we are champions for our children. We're not wardens or disciplinarians, but man, we are in this, and we are growing and learning and healing and hoping and changing together.
When we think about those early years of being so incredibly focused on the behavior and just missing the heart of our kids and really wanting them to behave perfectly. When we released some of that control a bit and started really sharing some power and giving voice and encouragement to our kids through the strategies and tools of ETC, there was hope and joy, I think, really did find its way back into our family. And so when we came to ETC, and by no means am I saying that was a quick fix.
Right.
We have been parenting, like we said, 19, almost 20 years, and we are still on a journey together. But where we were in a place of darkness and despair, we are much more full of joy and hope, even when things are difficult and hard, because life is sometimes difficult and hard. Right. And so what we want is to have the goal of building a healthy attachment relationship that can withstand those difficulties and those storms and the challenges that life brings at us and our kids and our family. We want a strong, resilient, cohesive, connected family that even on hard days, at the At the end of the day, we know that we are for one another, that we are with one another, and that we can count on one another. And when we mess up, like later today, which we will do, we all, when we
Or
don't
this morning,
do it, or yesterday, or, when we don't, quote unquote, do it perfectly, which has been a major shift for me. I've let go of that idea that I should do anything perfectly. What we do now is we model humanity, and we model humility, and we seek forgiveness. And it is something as simple as, hey, sweetie, I'm so sorry. I just got angry with you. I'm sorry I raised my voice. Can we try that again? Mom needs a redo. It is not rocket science. It is not overly complicated. It's really about what does it mean to build a trusting relationship that is not based on performance.
Yeah. And that's when I just think about the gift of ETC, when I think about why we came to ETC, it was really help. We need tools. We need something. And just help us get through today, the moment. And really, we were looking for information. And really what we found has been transformation. And it has transformed our family. It has transformed all relationships for us. And it's allowed us to do our own work. It's allowed us to go deeper with friends, deeper with one another, deeper with our kids. And, it means that we get to be humans together. And it's allowed us to jump into humanity in a sweet way.
Man, I love it. Thank y'all so much. Thanks for coming and sharing your story today. And
Thanks for having us.
man, this is so good. Lots to think about. Okay. Couple things before we end this episode. Number one, if you are listening to this is our first episode. So what we need you to do is to subscribe to this podcast on, subscribe on 3 or 4 platforms. Don't just limit yourself to one. Let's subscribe to all of them. But genuinely, if you do enjoy what you're hearing, please do rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. It is a huge help and helps this podcast be able to find the ears of other people who may also need it. So definitely do those things. Be looking out for episodes coming up. Next week, we will talk about whatever we want to talk about. It's our podcast.
But I'm pumped.
Oh, yeah, baby.
Yeah.
But we will have a full lineup coming at you with not just people who are in the world of parenting, but with experts in the field who can help give real hope to your parenting journey. So we hope to catch you next time. Thanks for Mo and Tona. I'm JD Wilson, signing off.